Yeah, because Terry said that Webster just texted her now asking how to get in, so I might just yeah, yeah, just oh yeah, oh yeah, it's in the spirit of the topic. Yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah, yeah, thank you so much for coming out. Sounds great. Sounds great. Chanel had a family emergency. So yeah, it's just you and me, and I think, especially given how the timeline of the workshop was going, it just means we have more time for questions. Yeah, but yeah, I think it'll be the same thing, and I'll sort of pass it off right after the why it matters soapbox. Oh wow. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Rode your bike all the way in from Seattle? Oh wow. Oh, okay. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Right. All right. Well, that's a convenient way to get out here. Yeah. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. right, thank you everyone for coming out to the session here, and thank you for coming out to Tilth. It's really lovely to see a whole bunch of new and fresh and old faces, and yeah, just really excited to be able to share this space with you all and discuss a topic that's really near and dear to my own heart, agroecology. And so to get it started, we did have two of our panelists had to bow out. So we're gonna be moving forward and working through the different transitions, and we also want to make it as interactive as possible. So there's going to be a few different activities that we're going to be doing to sort of help us engage a little bit more with the concept of agroecology, because it's very complex. We're talking about something that's a transdisciplinary topic. It's a science, it's a practice, it's a social movement, and it's a word that really resists defining. And so to try to come up with one definitive definition is doing the concept and idea of agroecology disservice. So we're going to be trying to work through what agroecology means to the individual, and also have a sort of overarching baseline understanding of what it is. Also on that note, one of the reasons why I really wanted to have this session about agroecology was to try to demystify it a little bit. It's a word that we really want to make sure doesn't get co-opted as we're moving through this agricultural system, and make sure that it retains its integrity in what it actually means, and we'll get into a lot of that in a little bit. So thank you all for coming, and I'm just going to move right through. The first things that we're going to be doing here is we're going to have like a brief check-in, Webster and myself. We're going to introduce ourselves and just sort of talk about how we're coming to the space, and go over some community agreements, because some of the conversations and dialogues can be vulnerable. And so I just want to acknowledge that from the get-go. And then we'll also go over the agenda and the flow of the whole workshop. And then we'll just get right into it. So I guess for starters, we'll just do a brief introduction. My name is Anthony Reyes. I'm a Chicano farmer. I work with 21 acres right now, based in Woodinville, and I live out in Seattle. Prior to that, I had worked with an organization, Homeless Garden Project in Santa Cruz. Prior to that, worked with Seattle Youth Garden Works with Tilth. And my history has very much so been along these agroecological studies. So I was working with CASPIS as both when I was going to school in UC Santa Cruz. And CASPIS is a Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems. Yeah, here's some, yeah, all right. And then also had the opportunity to work with Steve Gleesman a little bit with programming community and agroecology when I was also in Santa Cruz as well. So it was nice to be able to go work alongside these folks as a student, and then also come back and work more as peers with all these lovely humans. So that's a little brief introduction for myself. Webster, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Anthony. I just got off my bicycle, so I'm a little not super grounded at the moment, but my name is Webster Walker, and I am here on behalf of the Community Alliance for Global Justice, and specifically their AgriWatch campaign. And I have always preferred non-gendered pronouns if you're going to talk about me, but I've been in Seattle for about 40 years, born and raised in Michigan. I was raised in suburbia, and then lived in cities, and didn't really myself get my hands into the ground until 1985. I moved into a house called Toad Hall in Seattle, and built my first compost pile. I actually went out in the backyard, and I noticed that this pile of stuff was steaming because somebody had dumped some food into some leaves and you got the right ratio. Anyway, I've been super into composting ever since. Make dirt with your own hands. And I currently also volunteer with the Beacon Food Forest, which is a project to take what is known as public land, owned by the people of Seattle, supposedly through Seattle Public Utilities, and just turn it over to forest gardening to try to grow as much food and just let anybody who needs it come and harvest, open harvest anytime. And BFF is working with a number of different communities to try to get outside the available volunteer base, which initially tended to be mostly white people with money and time. So it's a struggle everywhere to try to get right relations among the people and between the people and the earth. And anyway, right now I recently took a job. I'm a janitor. I'm a union janitor at the new Climate Pledge Arena, which one of the investors gave a little intro talk where they literally said, we are going to save the world by investing in, you know, climate smart industry or whatever. Anyway, but I'm working there, and it's good because it's a union job, so I'm SEIU Local 6 now. So that's a very brief intro. There's way more to say. There's always way too much to say, but that's where I'm at.
Great, thank you. So just to be moving through, the next thing I want to just kind of introduce is going over some of these community agreements for the space, understanding that we are going to be sharing a lot of dialogue, sharing a lot of discourse, so making sure that we're creating and fostering a safe space for people to have their voices heard and represented. So just to go over them, the first one is be kind and respect ourselves and each other. Move in, move back. That's recognizing and acknowledging how much space you're taking in some of the dialogues, and making sure that there's room for everybody to be able to speak and be heard. Acknowledge and value process and commit to non-closure, especially within the topic of agroecology when it's such an amalgamous term and concept and idea. If you're walking out of this session with more pointed questions than you have answers, that's okay. It's when I'm thinking of agroecology, I'm thinking of it more as a journey, and less of a definitive concept and idea. No one knows everything. Together we know a lot. Embrace curiosity, censoring learning and growth. Assume positive intent, and create and foster a space for multiple truths. Again, since we're talking about agroecology, that last one, creating and fostering a space for multiple truths, is something that's going to be very important, as it's a concept that changes based on people's own personal narratives, based on their lived experiences, and even based on a lot of where they're coming from ancestrally as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then to go over the general flow and agenda that we're going to be doing here, I'm going to start with the introductions, which we're cruising right through. Then we're going to have a little activity that's going to test base of knowledge from folks, and also wanting it to do something that people who are participating virtually can also interact and engage in meaningful ways. And then we're going to just go over a real baseline definition and why it's important to talk about agroecology right now. And then have some time and space for Webster to discuss during the panel. And then we're going to go into a discussion, group discussion within the room, answering some of the same questions that we're asking ourselves throughout this workshop. And then we're going to finish it off with another word cloud and then have some open questions. And yeah, does anybody have any questions so far? We're just going to keep on moving through. Beautiful. Okay, so on folks' tables, you'll notice there might be a QR code. If people would be so kind as to just plug into that. If you don't have access to that, I also have it up on my computer up here, and would also invite folks up to come up and answer the question. But basically, the question is, what does agroecology mean to you? You can add as many answers as you want. And also feel free to share and discuss amongst folks around you. And we'll take about 3 to 5 minutes to go over some of these concepts and words. And Webster, if you want to have it open here.
So if I go to that address?
Yeah. Yeah, you should be able to put it in.
I don't suppose you got a guess password.
Yeah, it's be my guest.
All lowercase?
No, it's
Okay.
and if folks are participating virtually, the link will be in that slide that's talking about the word cloud. Okay. Let's see if this can refresh here. We'll just take a few more moments here. Just gonna keep having to refresh it because I'm not good with technology. All right, we'll sort of we'll conclude it right here. I'm going to refresh one last time to capture anything. If folks still have things in their on that first sheet, feel free to keep adding them, and I'll do one more refresh, and then we'll see what comes up. Beautiful. And I'll also have to figure out how to get back to slides. Yeah, so some of the things that we're seeing, the forefront, sustainable agricultural systems, ecology, all of these things, interconnectedness, seeing biologic diversity, trees and crops, local economies, regenerative. So what I'm gonna be doing is we're gonna keep this tab open, and then as we're going between the two slides, we'll be able to compare what the answers are like at the beginning, and then to see if there was any change throughout the workshop. So thank you for participating in that one brief section, and also to see sort of where folks are at in terms of understanding this concept and idea. We'll just keep on moving along. Okay, well, we went to the next slide. All right, so when we're talking about agroecology, one of the things that's really challenging is how do you define something that resists defining? How do you define something that's science, a practice, and a social movement? And understanding that every single person has a different meaning and different understanding and different relationship with this topic, because it's so rooted in experience, so rooted in narrative. This is a quote from Steve Gleesman on. I think this is the most complete definition I've found of agroecology throughout the years. And I'll just read it out loud. Agroecology is the integration of research, education, action, and change that brings sustainability to all parts of the food system, ecological, economic, and social. It's transdisciplinary in that it values all forms of knowledge and experience in the food system change. It's participatory in that it requires the involvement of all stakeholders from the farm to the table and everyone in between. And it's action-oriented because it confronts the economic and political power structures of current industrial food system with alternative social structures and policy action. The approach is grounded in ecological thinking where holistic, systems-level understanding of food system sustainability is required. So folks, understand that pretty well? Good baseline knowledge. So I'm going to tease a few things out of this definition right here. The areas that are highlighted are really where we want to be focusing our attention. When we're talking about agroecology, we're talking about this integration of research between the science, the practice, and the social movements. Understanding that, the first time agroecology was really coined as a term dates back to the 1930s, where it really started as this, the study of ecology in agriculture and the study of ecologies in agriculture. And then as there's numerous waves behind the agroecological thinking and agroecology as a study and practice. So as you start moving through the timeline, 70s, 80s, you begin having Steve Gleesman and Miguel Altieri, who teaches over at UC Berkeley currently, doing a lot more research and a lot more engaging with this topic. And so the second wave of agroecology was really to start interrogating this, the entire food system. And once we start talking about the entire food system, this conversation and dialogue around what agroecology is just gets way more complicated. That's involving a lot more of the social, a lot more of the cultural, a lot more of the really oppressive systems that are occurring within our current food system. And it also involves every single person as a participant in an agroecological system. And then after we have that, we also then it went into a third wave of agroecology, which that started bringing in some of this transdisciplinary nature of agroecology, recognizing and valuing different truths, different narratives, and really interrogating who the expert is on the topics and who the experts are. It would be looking at and prioritizing indigenous traditional forms of agriculture and acknowledging a lot of that wisdom that's coming along with it, just as highly as it would academia, and having value on both of those levels. Pretty darn radical. I think another important aspect when we're talking about agroecology, specifically when we're thinking about these food systems, the food system wave and the integration of various epistemologies and ontologies, and by that I mean the different ways and forms of knowing and our metaphysical relation to a lot of these concepts. So bringing a lot of that forward complicates what agroecology is and makes it so much more narrative based and so much more it's global and it's local. It's hyperlocal, whereas every single person has their own definition of agroecology, and it's a global movement. You'll have organizations like La Via Campesina, who got agroecology as a term that's adopted by the UN, and they're a network of campesino, campesina, campesinex throughout the world, peasant farmers, really leading the charge behind what it looks like to have food sovereign community and food sovereign world. And so when we're looking at this as well, you'll see that little Venn diagram of science, practice, social movement. And this next part I'm actually kind of proud of. This is going to be the peak of my sort of computer design type of things. I wouldn't read too much into the whole like Greco-Roman architecture behind it. What's really important is just think of it as the pillars that are really holding this concept of agroecology up. And I was also really excited that there was a Google stock image that had these exact frames, because I wouldn't have been able to make that myself. So when we're talking about agroecology, again, we have the transdisciplinary, we have participatory, we have action-oriented and ecological thinking. And then, again, another way of saying that is being rooted in these science, practice, and social movements. But one of the most important things when we're talking about agroecology, as I said, in that it is transdisciplinary, is asking to whom. And when you're really defining agroecology, this should be the first question that you're asking, is to who is answering this. I had to Google the difference between who and whom, and I'm still not sure if this is right. So if it's not, feel free to correct me. So I'll give my own definition as a means of breaking into like what it actually means to me. And I did take notes on this one. Agroecology to me has been really a journey in understanding and becoming a lot closer with some of my identities. As I said earlier, I'm a Chicano farmer, and that's very important to me and to how I operate and how I perceive agroecology. Agroecology is a concept that brings an understanding of my place as a Chicano in the food system, and provides this radical power that's distributed more fairly than it would under the regular food systems that we're currently with. And as you start thinking about agroecology as a concept that's creating spaces of resistance within an agricultural system or within a farm, you can start really looking at all of these everyday interactions, the really small things, as these forms of cultural resistance. For me, one of the big things is growing corn. Super simple. Growing corn, growing peppers, growing tomatoes. Seems like a very simple act, but then when you start looking at it through an agroecological lens, it's my way of connecting a lot with some of my ancestral roots. It's my way of continuing on this maíz narrative, or as in Nahua, the language that the Aztecs used, the word for corn is teotl sintle, or sintle teotl, and what that means is sacred corn. It's also the scientific name of the parent plant to corn, which is a whole other thing that you can read into a lot. Whereas the scientific name for corn is the maize. So when I'm talking about growing corn, you're growing so much more than that. You're growing some of this cultural resistance. You're growing closer connection to where I'm coming from, where my ancestors came from, the means in which they produced. One of the things that's really important in a lot of my agricultural systems is to incorporate my own narrative in what we're doing. And so on 21 acres, the means at which we did that was by planting a milpa. Is anybody familiar with what a milpa is? Right on. So to give another definition or a further definition of what a milpa is, it's a sociocultural practice and an agricultural practice as well. In Mesoamerica, milpa, it continues now a lot more in the Oaxacan region. Excuse me. But a milpa, it's both a form of agriculture, but it's also an act. You'd have entire communities coming together and investing their time in planting this milpa, and planting corn, beans, squash, amaranth. Every single thing that a community would need would be planted in this milpa, and the entire community would come out and participate in the planting. And so it's how are we able to be bringing some of these truths, some of my own cultural narrative into my own practice and into my own space, and be able to tell a story that's older than a lot of what we think of when we think of Western agricultural systems. And how do we keep that story alive? And how do we make sure that the process of colonialization, the process of genocide, that cultural and physical genocide, how do we keep this maize culture going throughout? And for me, it's a lot of growing corn. It's a lot of, there's challenges to growing corn, especially with, we have intense wireworm pressure that destroys most of it, but that's neither here nor there. It's more having that connection with where I came from, where my family came from, is what agroecology means to me, and carrying on that narrative, making sure that doesn't die. So that's a lot of what what we're talking about when we ask, what does it mean to who or to whom? And then the next part is, why does it matter? Why do we need to be talking about agroecology? Why do we need to be censoring conversations around agriculture or agroecology in our everyday conversations? Very blatantly, we need to be talking about agroecology because our current food system fails to feed our community. Our current food system fails to meet the need. And that's to know, that's not pointing the finger at farmers. In fact, it's quite the contrary, whereas if we're looking at caloric intake of food produced, globally we're producing 1.5 times the food needed to feed the entire world, yet we have 250,000 or 25,000 people dying of hunger every single day, and 9.1 million people dying of hunger every single year. And so when we're talking about the system has failed to feed the community, that's the system itself. And so it's important, especially now that we've gone through what feels like 5 years of COVID, which really peeled back the curtain on a lot of these injustices, a lot of these areas where we're seeing uneven distribution of food or allocation, and all the injustices therein. And so that's one of the reasons why we really need to be centering conversations around agroecology. Another is if we're looking at just in the US, our agricultural processes, the environmental and health costs per year averages about $4 billion just in the US. And so to be centering these conversations about how do we grow more, I'm looking at the word map or the word cloud right now,
How do we grow more sustainable? What does that sustainable actually mean? And how do we define it under this lens of agroecology? These conversations really need to be happening. And the other thing is that I wanted to really briefly touch on before passing it on to Webster, because I have a tendency to go on rants, is how does this differ from regenerative agriculture? The way I see it is regenerative agriculture does a lot to address the ecological concerns. When we're talking about a system and a practice that's addressing, well, first, if we look at regenerative, we need to understand what a generative process is. And a generative process, one of my favorite things, Jack Algier from Stone Barns said this, is we can understand generative process as nature, undisturbed nature. And if we're talking about a regenerative form of agriculture, a regenerative system, we need to be working in direct opposition to these degenerative practices and these degenerative systems. And insofar as that's the definition, or that's the understanding of what regenerative agriculture is, it's still operating within a food system that, as I said earlier, fails to be able to feed the world. And so we need to be thinking about more creative systems, more creative means of distributing and again, this isn't the work of just a farmer. This isn't the work of, it's the work of all of us in this room, but it's also, when we're talking about agroecology, we're talking about a transdisciplinary concept. We're talking about every single person, from the point that you buy a seed and even before that to the point where it's on the table and after that. And it's participatory. And so when we're talking about a system that is directly addressing these degenerative practices, that's where I find regenerative agriculture and agroecology as being different. Yeah, so that's one of the real reasons why we wanted to have this topic, and really just to point out the difference between regenerative agriculture and agroecology, because I've heard a lot of those two words being used synonymously. And again, we want to make sure that these terms, these definitions, aren't being co-opted. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Webster here to chat for a little bit.
Thanks. That was brilliant, Anthony. Superb. So I am here on behalf of the Community Alliance for Global Justice and the AgroWatch campaign of the Community Alliance. And Community Alliance for Global Justice was founded following the protests against the World Trade Organization in Seattle in 1999. CAGJ was started a couple years later by people who had been involved in organizing that protest, who wanted to carry the work forward in a productive way. Being based in Seattle, because the protest happened in Seattle, the WTO protest had a critique of globalization and of corporate globalization and of the whole system power structure of the established global economy, the people who claim to rule the world and own the world, who have very different interests than the majority of the people of the world, and of if you can think of the world having interests itself. Anyway, in about 2007, CAGJ adopted a focus on food and food justice and food sovereignty. And a few years later, started the AgroWatch program, because the Community Alliance is based in Seattle, and AGRA is a project of the Gates Foundation, started by the Gates Foundation, that wants to save Africa by promoting a new green revolution in Africa, for Africa, on behalf of Africa. because Africa is so, doing it wrong and needs modern industrial agriculture focused on production of commodity crops and massive chemical inputs and everything else to join the modern world. And anyway, we thought this was a horrifically flawed approach, and we felt like because we were here in Seattle, it was partly up to us to try to watchdog the Gates Foundation's work in Africa and toward Africa. And not just do this on our own behalf, but to actually work with African partners who are on the ground there, working on things like agroecology and biointensive farming and regenerative agriculture and that sort of thing. So there's way too much to say. I really can't say I can hardly scratch the surface of everything. But about a year and a half ago, on one of the listservs, a fellow named John Wilson from Africa, who's working there, who's affiliated with one of our partner organizations, posed the question, what is this regenerative agriculture that I keep hearing about? Is it like the same as organic, or is it the same as agroecology, or just what is it? And in response to that, I wrote a letter in response that just outlines some of the history of the terminology from my perspective here in the United States. And the TILF Association was part of the organic movement. And the organic movement was an effort to get away from the worst aspects of industrial agriculture and come up with some sort of ecological and social agriculture that would work for people and the earth instead of exploiting people and degrading the earth. In terms of organic, the movement had what in some ways was a great success in winning federal recognition in the United States for the organic standard. The thing is, at that point, the organic standard, as defined by the United States, became contested territory where industrial agriculture proponents can work to get themselves installed on the National Organic Standards Board and try to weaken the definitions. Anyway, the Rodale Institute, which decades long, preceding the TILF Association, involvement in the organic movement sort of helped bring the organic movement to the forefront. Seeing what was going on with the definition of the word organic and the marketing of the word organic, decided that they need to go a step further and come up with their definition of regenerative organic agriculture. Anyway, my point about all this is that agroecology is a social movement, and it is a practice of agriculture, and it is a science with research and progress. Agroecology is also a word, and as a word, it is contested. And the people who came up with organic and the people who came up with regenerative and the people who came up with sustainable and the concept of sustainability and the people who came up with green and the concept of green all had excellent intentions to try to address the problems in the human relationship to the ecology by defining how we do business or how we do agriculture. It needs to be defined in a way that supports ecology and supports people. Each one of these words became a marketing strategy and became degraded by the very interests who had produced the industrial agricultural system that was so degrading to people and the planet. And so when we're talking about agroecology, we know that we're going to come up against the same interests. And in fact, Agnes Kalibata, who is the president of AGRA, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, Following the failure of the UN Food Systems Summit and the boycott, the massive boycott of the UN Food Systems Summit by popular organizations, she has recently begun speaking about the importance of agroecology. And she's the head of this organization that has been promoting industrial ecology and high input industrial agriculture and high input agriculture in Africa. So we can be certain that as the movement for agroecology becomes more prominent and more successful, that the terminology is going to be contested, and it's going to be, if the industrial interests have anything to do with it, it's going to be degraded. And the thing is, I really appreciated Gleason's, I think that was their name, definition, including the concept that in practicing agroecology and talking about agroecology and being part of an agroecological movement, we confront the established system and the established powers that are behind that system. And it is my personal strong belief, this is not a formal position of the Community Alliance or of AgriWatch, but that if we do not successfully transform the system, then we will not successfully carry out the work of our movement. And this system didn't emerge yesterday. This system emerged, as Anthony pointed out of colonization and enslavement and genocide. And, those didn't just happen because, enslavement happened so that they could produce commodity crops, right? Primarily cotton in the United States. All these things are intertwined, and the modern corporation was literally founded to carry out colonization. The first publicly traded, limited liability, investor-owned corporation was the Dutch East India Company. And the British East India Company, which already existed, reorganized itself on the same basis. And the modern corporation is essentially designed for colonization. You find something that isn't owned, you gain access to it, or it is owned, or somebody else doesn't have a concept of ownership of it, and you claim ownership of it. And at this point, these interests are claiming ownership of corn because they have been able to manipulate the DNA, and now they say they own corn. And they are driving out, or attempting to drive out, people who participate in the MILPA system, or anybody else who doesn't want to buy in or doesn't have the capacity to buy into the industrialized agricultural system. So I have a tendency to go on long rants myself. That's why I said, uh-oh, when you said you have a tendency to go on rants. Not about you, but more about me. So if we want, you talked about sort of maintaining the integrity of the word and the movement. I think the most important thing for maintaining integrity is maintaining our own practice and our own ethics. And we can be sure that the terminology and the movement are going to be contested. And the people who are going to contest them have interests, and they have interests in the established industrial system and the established system of wealth production and wealth concentration that all emerged out of colonization and enslavement and genocide and grand theft continental, that as far as they're concerned, they define the world today and they claim to own most of it. If we don't face the concentrated wealth and figure out how to redistribute it in an ecological and social fashion, then we will endlessly be faced with their pouring their resources into muddying the waters about what our words mean. At this point, if you say sustainable, what does it mean? The Climate Pledge Arena where I work now is like the most sustainable arena on the planet, and it's like this big marketing strategy. But sustainability has become largely a marketing concept. I was riding my bicycle a couple days ago, and this van passed me, the big moving van, and it said, "Eco Movers." you know, and they're like, they have an internal combustion engine, and what is eco about their moving? I don't know, but it's a good marketing strategy to put green or sustainable or eco, put eco in front of pretty much anything, and it's supposed to resonate well in focus groups, you know, or whatever, and we're not a focus group. We live on this planet. You know, I've always liked the word agroecology because the foundation is ecology. And we are humans and we are part of the ecology. And if we don't have a functioning ecology, then we don't have ourselves. We don't have our own communities. And the industrial system is grievously degraded the ecology. You know, when I was born in 1959. Dwight Eisenhower was president, whatever. Recent reports indicate that the amount of animal wildlife on Earth has been cut by about 60% since I was born. Most of the animals are gone. That's really, really serious business. And if we can't get agriculture to stop degrading, to stop colonizing, to stop poisoning, yeah, it's a real bad scenario. So I think it's important to recognize that we're not just talking about, you know, farmers who have good practices, right? We're talking about confronting the established industrial system of colonization that tries to define everything on its own terms. And I guess on that note, I'll just stop because I could go on forever. And I'm sure I've missed a lot and I've probably said too much. But I think these are really, really important words and really important movements. Oh, I guess the last thing I'll say is that just a little wordplay. I like words, and I like agroecology because it's like the practice of agriculture in terms of ecology. Ecology is the foundation of it. It has to work ecologically. A human, what is a human? A human, the three words have related etymology: human, and humble, and humus. So humans are humus. We are of the earth. We are the earthlings, right? That's basically what the word means. And humble means like low, to the earth, to the dirt, to the humus, you know, the soil. So I think it's important for all of us to try to remember that and recognize that we are simply of this ecology, and we emerge from it, and we have to retain our participation in it, and practice ecology and practice agroecology, and try to stop practicing industrialism and colonization in whatever it is that we're doing, and try to recognize that systemically, whatever we're involved in, whatever our work is, whatever, you know, whatever we do with our lives, whatever organizational structures we are embedded in our day-to-day lives, to recognize the roots of all this systemic degradation of the humanity and ecology, and that these systems and these organizations and these businesses, these enterprises, these schools, anything, our homes, our families, whatever we're doing, we got to try to get back to the roots of our humanity and be humble and work with the soil, work with the dirt, work with the ecology. So that's my rant.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that.
You bet.
The one thing I just wanted to bring up, one last thing, and then we're going to sort of break up and start discussing amongst ourselves. Actually, I'll say two things, because I can't just stick to one. So one, as you heard throughout both of our dialogues around what agroecology is, the real centerpiece that's holding everything together is social capital. How are we creating systems that are based around social capital? How are we prioritizing people over profit? And not to say that we even have the agency to be able to do that right now. And it's challenging it's easy to just say, like, yeah, prioritize people over profit, but then when you're then operating within a system that has a very opposite, the exact opposite ideologies, how do we do that? How do we actually implement this systemic change? How do we practice agroecology? And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to bring up that story of just incorporating and finding all those different little areas within your own practices and your own current existing, your existing practices that that are perpetuating agroecology. Like the simple act of saving seeds can be revolutionary. The simple act of growing corn can be this, and like one of my favorite things is that like, and it's a saying that a tortilla is a symbol of resistance, which I love for so many reasons. And so it's identifying all of these little areas within your own systems, within your own lives that are more perpetuating this agroecology, and how do you tease some of those deeper meanings behind what you're doing to bring forth this system that's prioritizing social capital. I think I might reorganize a little bit, because the next one we were going to do breakout groups. But before doing breakout groups, I just want to open it up if anybody has any preliminary questions. I know it was everything about agroecology is so heady. And so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask them now. And then we'll also have time at the end to ask questions again.
Questions or contributions?
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm laughing that you brought that up, because that was a lot of the perspective that our two other panelists, Chanel and Mas, are going to be bringing it as examples of some of these agroecological systems in action. So I'll use the example of some of the work that Chanel was doing with the U District Food Bank, and it's even just the difference of how produce is being marketed, how it's being distributed, how people are being included into the process. So for folks who are not familiar with U District Food Bank, they have a rooftop roots farm. As the name suggests, it's on the rooftop of their building, and it presents numerous different means of which people experiencing food insecurity can engage with the entire process of food production and have say in what sorts of produce are being delivered down to the main floor. It also provides a source for folks to really be thinking about how the produce is being distributed in different ways, prioritizing some of these larger food access networks. And again, in like if you were at some of the other workshops, there was one this morning that was all about emergency food systems and some of the action that's happening in there, and some of those systems being more participatory, and means in which like the We Feed WA and some of these other iterations of the King County Farmer Share, and how are we engaging with some of these systems that are providing incentives for farmers to be selling produce to people experiencing food insecurity. I think another example that I'll use from some of my personal experience in the past of an agroecological system, or an agroecological, I would say more agroecological systems thinking, feels a little bit more accurate than labeling one system as like, this is agroecology, which it is. It's like a yes and. We're living in a world of both ands, yes ands. And so acknowledging that you can have both narratives happening at the same time. But with my old work was with Homeless Garden Project in Santa Cruz, and we were a transitional employment program for people experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. And our entire system, well, I was a farm manager there, but we would I would say like farm manager there, because my entire process there was more facilitating other people to be managing the space and having this more participatory means of producing agriculture, and also one where people within Santa Cruz experiencing homelessness were able to come to the site and find that space of belonging, find that space where they can grow and learn, both in a metaphorical way, but a very tangible. They're growing and learning, but also have control over where the produce is going and how it's being distributed, where it's being distributed. We would be working collaboratively to come up with the crop plans, discuss a lot of the deeper meanings behind some of these practices and processes, and again with just because it was me managing it and I wanted to bring in my own personal narratives into it. We had a milpa there as well. It'll be a little wherever I go, I feel like there's a milpa that follows. the work of La Via Campesina. They also have, like, I think the best definition of food sovereignty. It's like 3 pages long, very succinct.
I could say a couple of things. If I had a slide ready, you could see that Community Alliance is cagj.org, so that's pretty easy to remember, cagj.org. And if you go there, you can find our AgriWatch program, and if you go there, you can find links to the partner organizations in Africa that we're working with, who are on the ground doing agriculture in ways that are agroecological. And another one that I would mention is in Seattle, the Beacon Food Forest that I mentioned. It's the process is open and inclusive and slow and clunky sometimes. There's no director, there's no manager. We have people get together and they decide what plants we're going to get, and they decide where they're going to put them, and they decide everything together as a group of people who are there. So we're trying to develop our own social ecology from the ground up. And another thing that I would mention, and I don't know if anybody involved would use the word agroecology. I mean, I'm sure somebody would, but I don't know if you noticed what the news coming out of India just this weekend. Prime Minister Modi, I believe just yesterday, gave in to the mass movement of farmers and withdrew the 3 laws that he had put forth over a year ago that were going to open the Indian agricultural economy to global competition, right? Global markets. It was going to free the farmers to participate in these markets. And all the farmers said, no, that's not what we want. We don't want neoliberalism. We don't want corporate competition. We want to protect the system that we've got, which allows us to farm and protects, so it's not like pure, perfect, whatever, organic, anything, but it is definitely a social movement that is confronting the established power structure, and they just won this tremendous victory. The thing is, these days, most of our tremendous victories are holding actions. Like they prevented these new laws from going in, right? They didn't like establish a new system of agriculture. They didn't, kick Cargill and ADM out of, anyway. But that's something else you can look at as an example of agroecology.
Great. So in the time we have left, I want to give people the chance to really engage with the topic and discuss with folks around them. Also, my head works in really weird ways. Everything Cuba does with agriculture, that's agroecology. We're going to leave that and not go far into that right now. So we have time and space to really get into some discussions. One, those pigs are adorable. Which is the main reason why I chose that picture. It just brings me a lot of joy. But what I want to invite folks to do now is with some of the people around in your area where you're seated, maybe start a conversation. Let's get into groups of maybe 4, and then really discuss how does agroecology show up in your work and life. Understanding that it's a science, it's a practice, it's a social movement. All of these things. So we'll take the last few minutes and just have sort of a group discussion within your own little clusters.
No, it would have been so much. Would have been tremendous. I come from a animal perspective.
Yeah, it was definitely one of the things. Like, all right, just keep rolling with it. Yeah, that's right. And we're definitely bringing the the system.
Yeah, and I actually came about this close from walking in. Could have been panel.
It would have been fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very much so. One of the things I didn't put on the community comments, but it follows like whatever happens, whoever shows up are the right people, that starts the right time. So for good reason.
Yeah, it's part of humility, not being stuck on some concept of what has to be. Just like working with what is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it might not be a better choice if I could do everything.
I sometimes get into those like weird thoughts. I think the second it comes to my mind, just be like this, just make it, and then I go back to no, that's a fascist dictatorship.
Right.
Well-intentioned fascist dictatorship.
Benevolent. And the philosopher king. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's so daunting to imagine like unwinding the whole colonial project, because like it runs the world. It created all these nation states, and it defines everything in its own mind. And to just imagine like growing something else that's going to supplant it. I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah, what biases are happening within that? Yeah, I feel like I go through these like ebbs and flows of like we would solve the world, and I just like have to be like it's no, we can do it. Like no, it's not.
Yeah, I'm kind of known for my ranting on the Agroecology team. Phil speaks up once in a while and goes, Webster, you're not leading the revolution. We're watchdogging the agri program for the Gates Foundation. That's what we're actually doing. And when funny thing is, successfully been fluffed.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely appreciate the rants. I think this topic is like, it's asking, it's wanting to rant.
No, I was real happy to see the definition, and I'm not familiar with the people leasing
The LTA, they're wonderful. This one was I worked on it for a little bit of time at Santa Cruz, and it was like such a brilliant mind. Yeah, and everything because he and Altieri started this other organization, Community Agroecology Network, and their primary focus is around coffee. Coffee production. Yeah, it's fascinating having something that's so pointless. We're gonna interrogate this large concept and focus on that. Yeah. Also, create coffee.
Part of my ranting just comes from experience of being involved in projects and sort of seeing them diluted or degraded or co-opted. I was in the co-op sector for 13 years. The concept of a cooperative enterprise rather than like top-down, whatever, autocratic enterprise is great, except as co-ops get larger and more successful, they tend to adopt the systems and practices that have been established by the systems defined by capital. REI is a co-op, but they have a president who has huge salary, whatever, all this stuff. And they're marketing all over the world, their products, whatever. It's just like
Incorporated.
yeah, it's hard to get around. And then what was my other? Anyway, my mind goes off. Yeah. Super appreciate you putting this together.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah.
always happy to do it.
How long have you been with 21 Acres?
2.5 years. Yeah, it's the first place I've worked that's not like a plant transition program for people with people with transplant.
Right.
So it was like a big. When I first got there, my first thing was like, disconnected from where I'm really rooted.
Right.
So we've been, developing partnerships that carry on a lot of those same philosophies. Doing what we can as a
It was like when I was at the co-op, I was a community outreach administrator at the co-op, so we interacted with a lot of organizations. It seems like I interacted with a couple of people there, where we supported some of their programs. But they're probably not around anymore. That would have been 8 years ago.
yeah, so we still have that there. Back there, my boss. All right, we'll just take maybe one more minute to wrap things up. I know we're over a little bit, but if folks are having discussion, they're having discussion.
Because technically, we could say it's a 5, right? Probably not. I gotta get home at some point.
Yeah, I got my application yesterday. So it's just, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it's have a day off. Thank you. All right, maybe maybe if folks can finish their final thoughts, and we'll bring it back to a whole group, and then yeah, then we'll go from there. I'll leave the picture of the pigs up there because I mean they're just adorable. Would anybody be interested in sharing what some of the takeaways from the individual groups? Anything that was talked about, and y'all can just feel free to popcorn it. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming out and trying this thing on. I really appreciate it. Really lovely to see everybody at a TILT conference again. Excited to see some of you all next year. And I guess if there's nothing else, there's evaluations that have been passed out, and make sure to fill out also the conference evaluation as well. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be here, and I'll keep them brief and not ransom. But yeah, thank you all.
And you can hand your evaluations to me. It's the end of the conference, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much for coming. If you haven't already, please do fill out
Thanks for coming.
conference evaluation. It's a big piece of paper that's in the template.
Yeah, absolutely.
there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, of course.
And you can also, if you're really into this and think to yourself you'd like to be part of the planning committee, you can be. There's a little thing to sign up front.